We're going to work now on the other end. The important part about the other end is something we've done a million times over, is you want to put the cap before you start soldering anything, because otherwise you'll have to desolder everything again to get to the part that you need. The other thing is we also want to apply the insulator in this stuff. There's multiple ways of doing that. You could obviously use some insulating tape and just wrap it around, or you can use these little shrink tubes which you can buy at Radio Shack. So we'll apply some heat. Be careful so you don't completely go through it. There's better equipment to do this, but in the absence thereof, this should do fine. Good. We'll put the cap back on. Alright, now we need to solder this guy. For the leads, this is a little bit too long, so you probably don't need more than about 3 millimeters. The easiest way to approach the connector, in my opinion, is, especially when it's this kind of small and frail, I would say take the ground, come from the bottom of it, try to run it through if you can, and then bend it backwards. Depending how much slack you need to get the other wires as close to the connections as possible. So you can see this one will be fine here, they'll be fine there. So this is probably about the right length. We'll pinch it like so, and then we can also bend it here with one of these metal pieces at the end, which will give us additional integrity while we are soldering stuff on there. It helps a great deal when you have such a small structure. And then the other one we can use later to pinch the remaining 2 wires to give it a little bit greater strength on that end as well. And I will apply some solder on this end here, and then obviously solder the other 2 guys from the inside. Now when you're connecting these two, my preferred way of doing that is simply to approach them from the inside going out, because it's going to be easier to solder, but also it allows you to use the opportunity that hole gives you in terms of structural integrity. Bend it here, and because it's about 3 or 4 millimeters, it doesn't go too far forward. And we need to do the same thing with the other wire. Make sure that you untangle them so they're going to be sitting on top, like so. So when you're applying here the solder, make sure that you have the solder right there on the actual connector, because otherwise it will not stick. So don't apply solder to the actual soldering gun and then bring it to the actual connector, because it's not going to work. And make sure that there's plenty of space here and on the other side. If you find that after pinching the cable with this metal thing here, once you pinch it, if you find that it's actually too low, it might not be a bad idea to kind of run an insulation tape just like so around it and then wrap it from below to prevent any kind of breakage, because once again this thing is going to be inside of the speaker under a bunch of other stuff, and if that thing breaks, that means you have to disassemble most of the speaker to get back to it. And then the last thing obviously is to pinch these 2 guys. So you may not get the best pinch on both of them, and that's okay. These guys will not have that much pressure on them, but certainly shouldn't hurt to have them a little bit pinched. And you can see there's enough room here that it should probably be safe to close it off, but just in case, should you decide that you do need some space in there, can I just get some insulation tape so that way we're absolutely sure that this thing will never short circuit. Well, not never, but I ran it down there on the bottom. Gonna wrap it around a few times, and that should take care of one of the connectors. So now the last thing you gotta do is screw it in, and you're done. Okay, so then what you need to do is, of course, rinse and repeat for the other 2, and that should be it. And probably just add some more insulation tape here to protect this little part of ground wire being exposed there. So we have all 3 cables done now. They've been all properly grounded and insulated from each other. The last thing we want to do is put some tape here to prevent from insulation from pulling back and exposing the ground, and therefore shorting something else in the speaker. And we'll do that momentarily, but right now I want to show you this part. Our bezel is probably a little bit different than the ones that you'll use, but if you want to use the same one or a similar one, you will want to apply this way. Put it in there, and that's it. Now we will not screw these in completely because they will interfere when the thing is coming into the board. So we're using these kinds of screws. This place here and there, and like I said again, we will just tap these in there. Anyway, so this is done as far as the actual breakout cable is concerned. Now we have to get the power switch in there, and the power switches are here. We opted for these guys, and any power switch will do. We only need 2 pins, and we will connect them like this. And then before we actually start installing it, we have to apply a little bit of hot glue goop here and here, because when this stuff starts bending against the speaker, the actual switch will tend to expose itself, which we don't like. Then we need to get the power connector. Depending on what kind of connector you get, you have to check which one is ground, which one is plus and minus. And the easiest way to do that is just connect the power supply of the adapter and see how the current is running through it. So we will not tighten this too much for the time being, but generally we'll then run the plus from here to here, and then from there we'll run 3 pluses for each of the power connectors. We'll do the same thing with minus, so minus and plus in the center. Now we have the power cables in place. This is the minus in our case, and that's the plus, that's the ground. We don't need that for DC power. And then the plus goes here, that's our switch on off, and then 3 power supplies go there. We'll gunk this up with the hot glue just to prevent any kind of shortening, because this stuff is pretty close to each other. And then we pair these guys together to design our power cable, and we'll try to find ones that are approximately the same length. Okay, and now we need these power thingies. So there's different ways you can do this. This one actually has a little bit of an inflection there, so it would be easier probably to take that ground and or minus and run it down here like so, and just solder it against that. Make sure that this is not too big of a solder, because then it's going to be hard to close this little lid off. So solder prior to putting it in there. We'll see this better. So it gets a little bit sticky from flux. We'll try to melt this guy. Jam the cable. Apply solder. Make sure we're not shorting anything out, because that would be a bad idea. That should be it. Now we just pinch the guy. Because the cables are pretty big, we can't pinch it too much. Should be good enough. Okay, here. Now these guys happen to be kind of finicky with their threads on these things, so the best thing is just to kind of fiddle with it until we get it right. There we go. So that guy is good. It's good to check between each of these, because if you do short one out, you've shorted them all out, and that way it's going to be easier to trace down the culprit. So 2 more to go and we'll be done. Alright, so here's our octopus. Now, we'll screw these guys in when we actually put it in the case. The on and off switch. And the last thing we'll do here is we'll just gunk this up a little bit to protect it from being shorted out or anything along those lines. We've opted for using light pipes to transfer light onto the case. So here's our little light pipe, which will connect to the amp later. And voila, there's our little connector thing.